Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Unpacking the Backpack. It's a Sunday here in rainy and cold or chilly Sacramento. Uh, yeah, I was kind of looking forward to enjoying some me time by the pool in 80-degree weather, but I guess I'm going to have to wait for that when I get back to Houston next weekend. Yes, that is the life of a road warrior. Don't feel bad for me, but rain, cold, flight delays, not being home. Yep, it's a glorious life, everybody. But well, that was a joke, but I actually do love it. So, today on the podcast, I want to dive into why leaders need and deserve a coach. Now, leadership is about action, not title, position, and power. So I want to make sure that the my commentary and the links to research apply to all of us. So I don't want people to be like, oh, well, you know what? I'm not going to listen to this. Eric's just talking about principles, central office. No, 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 no. Real leadership happens at the classroom level. And that's where the work happens. However, we want to make sure that all different levels, administrators, teachers, coaches, librarians, teaching assistants, they all have that kind of understanding of, what it means to lead, but also making the connection back to coaching. And, before I kind of dive in, one of my favorite quotes is from Nick Saban, the former Alabama football coach. And he said, I didn't make any of this stuff up. I learned it from somebody else. And I'm always looking for that next person to learn something from. It's such a powerful quote. And, you know, coaching is teaching. Growing up as a child, I played numerous sports recreationally and also in high school. And I actually, believe it or not, actually played some Division III football when I got to college. But upon entering high school, I was not the best athlete by any means. But football was one sport where I excelled more than others. And then this, as I just mentioned, led to some playing time in college. Even though I had some fantastic coaches throughout my days playing competitive sports, I never gave much thought to becoming a coach myself. Once I knew that my destiny was to become a teacher, that was my sole focus, to teach. However, weeks before I was set to begin in my first role, I was contacted by one of my former high school football coaches, Pete Raduzzi. And what I remember about Coach Raduzzi is no matter how cold it was in New Jersey, when he was on the sidelines, I mean, literally, it was like 0 degrees. He always wore shorts. Always wore shorts, no matter the weather. And Coach Raduzzi called, pleading with me to take the open freshman coaching role for the freshman football team. Initially, I resisted, but then decided that this could be an excellent opportunity to connect with more kids and hopefully in the process pass along some of the life lessons that I learned from my former coaches. I loved coaching football and eventually took on the freshman lacrosse and head ice hockey positions in my school. Here's a fun fact, everybody. I never played lacrosse, I never played ice hockey. The moral of the story is coaching is teaching. For years, I was able to teach both in the classroom and on the field. And that is one of the critical points that I want to make in this podcast. In many aspects, coaching is teaching, but without formal grades. As a coach, I provided lessons and strategies on skill development, as well as competencies that pertain to excelling at a particular sport. Each practice involved modeling, guided practice, and either individual or team practice. At the end of each practice, there was a closure activity where we reflected on the events of that day while preparing for a future contest. The actual game or competition was more or less an assessment of what my players had learned during practice. And what I tried to do was kind of make those direct connections to whether we call it tier one instruction, high quality first instruction, whatever we want to make that connection to. But coaching is so intertwined to teaching. And, coaching is so much more than the result of a game, a match, or a competition. It's really about helping students develop many of the qualities and characteristics in life that cannot be measured with an actual number, such as leadership, commitment, perseverance, motivation, self-discipline, teamwork, resilience, enthusiasm, and reliability. The positive impact of a good coach can be felt for years, just like a great teacher. And this can lead to success in both professional and personal aspects of life. When we reflect on some of the outcomes that I've shared, it's apparent how important the act of coaching is in numerous professions, not just in athletics. Many school districts and organizations across the world invest in instructional and digital coaches to assist teachers in further developing pedagogical capacity in these respective areas. This is a sound investment indeed, but research from the Wallace Foundation empowers schools, districts, and organizations to expand support to a group that is most often left out: leaders. Think about this, everybody. We have instructional coaches. We have digital coaches. We have curriculum coaches. But do we have those opportunities, those positions to really help coach leaders? And, when we look at an array of studies, and I'm not going to bore you with all the specifics. If you listen to this podcast, you know that I'll put some links in the show notes, and then I typically follow up with a blog post the next week after the podcast airs. So I'll get more into the research behind this. But when I kind of try to summarize a few studies, when it comes to the impact of school-related factors on student learning, research shows that school leaders are second in importance only to teachers, but can also have a multiplier effect on the quality of teaching. Historically, however, professional development, and I talked about that on the last episode, something that's done to us, but let's talk about, let's stay on the topic of professional development, has been limited to periodic workshops and training that mostly focus on administrative, operational, and compliance issues. But think about this. On the standalone PD days, are there actually targeted sessions for leaders? Now, from my lens, I often see so many different opportunities for teachers, but then I'm looking around and looking at the schedule. I'm looking at where the leaders are, and I'm like, okay, well, what's going on for them? So the point here is that leaders rarely receive ongoing, embedded coaching and problem-solving support based on the instructional needs of specific schools. So the point here is leaders need consistent support and feedback on all aspects of the position to continually grow and improve. But the most emphasis should be on issues related to whether you're a fan of instructional leadership. I'm more a fan of pedagogical leadership, and again, I've written about that extensively. But here's the thing. The key with coaching is how the leaders open up and say, hey, here's where I think I need to grow and improve. So if teachers are being coached on research-based instructional strategies and digital pedagogy, for example, then leaders need to be well equipped to provide useful feedback and conduct effective observations or evaluations on whatever the focus is. Whatever we are pouring into our teachers, into our staff, the same has to be poured into leaders who need to support, guide, provide feedback. By the way, the same can be said about PLCs, use of data, meeting needs of learners with special needs, innovative practices, space redesign. We have to really move past putting all of that emphasis on one group, because here's what I hear from teachers all the time. They want leaders who understand what they've been trained on, who understand the pedagogical approaches, who can model how to use data or to facilitate not glorified common planning, but an actual professional learning community. So, I encourage you to Google and take a look at the research from the Wallace Foundation for more detail. And again, I'll put some of this in the show notes. But that detail on the why and how of coaching leaders is so important. So I kind of want to dive into some other key considerations when it comes to coaching leaders. And I share this because in my role, I've been here in California coaching leaders all week. This upcoming week, I'm going to be in New York, Florida, again in California. I'm going to be in Mexico soon. So here's the thing, I serve as a coach for leaders, but some leaders I work with actually go and seek out additional support. That's how important this is. I was with a principal this week, and we were reflecting on the work this year with me. But then, much to my pleasant surprise, he showed me all the work that he was doing virtually with another coach that he sought out. Everybody, this is intrinsic motivation. If you think about Drive by Dan Pink, Mastery, Autonomy, Purpose, this principal went and sought out extra support because when we're in classrooms, he's telling students, he's telling the teachers, hey, everybody, this is Eric. Eric is my coach. Eric is here to help me get better. All right, I digressed a little bit, but I was so excited to share that story. So, back to some of the key considerations to coach and support leaders. One of the issues with any type of coaching is when principals, central office feel the coaching is focused on their needs and remains confidential, as opposed to focusing solely on the needs of the district. It is beneficial to their growth when they understand this is about them. This is about their opportunities to grow. It's not being dictated. It's not being mandated. And it's something they want to do, not what they have to do. Leaders, like teachers, need to feel that there is trust when it comes to working with a coach. Additionally, leadership coaching is only an effective means of professional growth when it has the following elements aligned to it. Happens over an extended period of time, involves external thought partners. Notice I didn't say thought leader or expert. Involves external thought partners. Teachers, leaders are deeply engaged in the work. And the work, the coaching, the feedback, the action planning challenges existing beliefs. And all this is aligned to a peer-reviewed study from Timperley et al. In 2007. Research has consistently shown that professional learning that leads to school improvement and meaningful changes to practice is ongoing and job embedded. It is incumbent upon organizations, boards, school districts to commit to helping both teachers and leaders through effective coaching practices. And if you are a leader listening to this, you need to advocate and say, hey, I could really benefit from a thought partner. I could really use an outside perspective. And again, I'm not saying that this can't be done in districts, in schools. But from my experience, being in thousands of classrooms and hundreds of schools each year, it's kind of like a missing piece. Larger organizations and districts might be able to make it work with existing structures, but this does not eliminate some of the inherent bias and trust issues that still exist. Bias and trust are embedded in almost every system. That's where the external support could be a game changer. Being coached by a person who will eventually evaluate your performance might not always lead to a trusting relationship. So it's also important to have coaches that possess the practical experience aligned with the areas where a leader can benefit from job-embedded coaching. For me personally, I love coaching educators in small groups. During these sessions, I get to see firsthand how they're implementing ideas and strategies into practice to grow. While giving keynotes and facilitating workshops is something I love, both lack an ongoing component, which is one of the most critical aspects of professional learning that leads to scalable results. While the one and done and drive-by events are great for establishing the why, once the excitement dies down, people are often clamoring to figure out how to make what they just heard a reality in their specific context. Having multiple touch points and small groups allows for more engagement, personalization, mentoring, feedback, and the time to dive more deeply into concepts. There are so many ways that an effective coach reaches the people that he or she are trying to support. And, when you are looking for that support as an educator, when you really want to be coached up, when you want to be given feedback, think about this, try this, consider this. Here are some strategies that I use as a coach that I feel help to build trust, to build those relationships, but to move people to see the value for themselves of doing things differently and better. So, here they are. Effective coaches ask questions. They don't have all the answers. They don't know the context, but effective coaches ask questions. Effective coaches listen intently to process where the leader is and what that leader actually needs to be successful. Effective coaches are non-judgmental. Effective coaches align ideas to research and evidence. Effective coaches model strategies. Effective coaches provide honest feedback. They create a safe environment that encourages conversation, and they utilize positive reinforcement. Coaching can lead to improvements in teaching, learning, and leadership. These results are not isolated just achievement data, but also to the many qualities and characteristics mentioned earlier in my little dialogue here on this podcast that cannot and should not be measured with a number. If the goal is to support our teachers, then we must ramp up the assistance for all school leaders, including central office. Investing time and resources in people, regardless of position, is the key to transforming culture in a way that leads to better results. Remember this, everybody. Coaching takes the why and moves educators along a continuum of effectively leading change, the how, and what can be used to show success. Well, I want to thank you all for joining me on this episode of Unpacking the Backpack. I think I'm going to break a record here. It's pushing close to 20 minutes, which is a little bit longer than usual. But, if you listen to this podcast, you could reach out to people informally, your network, get that coaching. But the key is advocate for the support that you need and deserve to become the best iteration of yourself to support your people. Thanks again, everybody, for joining me on Unpacking the Backpack. And as always, keep making a difference.